Here is something nobody tells you about acts of kindness. They don't disappear. They don't evaporate into the air like morning fog or dissolve into the background static of ordinary life. They sink. They find a person, the right person, and they go all the way down to the bone, and they wait there, patient as stone, until the moment arrives when they're needed. Sarah Mitchell lost her job on a Tuesday morning in August for buying a man a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie. The man was 6'4", 240 pounds, covered in tattoos that mapped 30 years of a life that would make most people cross the street. He wore a leather vest with a patch that made her manager's face go the color of old milk. He didn't ask for the free meal. He didn't even say thank you, not in words. What he did was press a folded paper napkin into her palm as he walked out the door, look at her with gray eyes that had seen wars she couldn't imagine, and say 2 words. Keep it. She kept it. 4 or 5 years, in boxes and wallets, and on corkboards, and finally under her bed in a shoebox between her mother's rosary and her brother's first report card. She kept it. And everything that happened after, the bankruptcy filings, the betrayal, the phone call that changed her life, the justice that came rolling in like a freight train with no brakes, all of it started with that napkin. Sarah Mitchell was 27 years old and tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. She'd been up since 4:30 that morning, moving quietly through the apartment so she wouldn't wake Danny, laying out his clothes for summer camp, packing a lunch that included both a sandwich and a note, because she'd read somewhere that kids who got notes in their lunches felt more secure. And she had filed that fact away with the ferocity of a woman who is determined to do this correctly even when she doesn't have the resources to do it easily. She caught the 6:15 bus to the Red Rock Diner on Route 66, arrived at 6:51 to change into her uniform in the bathroom, because the employee break room had a broken lock and she didn't trust the new line cook, and had been on her feet since 7 o'clock. The Red Rock was a Route 66 holdover. Chrome fixtures, red vinyl booths worn smooth at the seams, a pie case that rotated slowly near the register like a display of the faithful. It smelled of burnt coffee and fryer grease, and underneath both of those, something older. The accumulated labor of waitresses who had worked themselves hollow in this exact building for 40 years. Sarah had learned its rhythms the way she learned everything, through attention and repetition, because she had never once in her life been able to afford to learn things the expensive way. She was good at the job. She could carry 4 plates on each arm without a tray, remember 8 orders without writing them down, and manage a table of drunk cowboys at 11 p.m. with a tone that suggested she had seen everything and found none of it particularly surprising. She had a gift for reading people, a gift born not of some mystical intuition, but of years of careful watching, the kind of watching that children who grow up in unstable households learn early, because the ability to read a room can mean the difference between a good night and a bad one. Gerald Hawkins, the manager, she had read with particular precision. He was a 52-year-old man who sweated through his collar before 9 a.m. regardless of temperature, who treated the kitchen staff as though they were a problem he hadn't solved yet, and who had a complicated relationship with authority that expressed itself in 2 ways: elaborate deference upward and something close to cruelty downward. He was not a cruel man in the way that movies portray cruel men, dramatically, memorably. He was cruel in the manner of water finding cracks, incrementally, consistently, in small ways that were individually deniable and collectively suffocating. Sarah had worked for him for 3 years. She had watched him comp a health inspector's meal without blinking. She had watched him look the other way while the cook skimmed the register. She had filed both observations away with the rest of her knowledge of how the world actually worked, and she had kept her head down because she needed this job in the specific, non-negotiable way that people who have no safety net need things. She was refilling the ketchup bottles at table 9 when she heard the motorcycles. The sound arrived before the sight, a low, rolling thunder that built from outside the windows and filled the diner the way real thunder fills a valley, pressing itself into the corners, vibrating the flatware, changing the quality of the air. The customers at the counter turned on their stools in unison. The family in the corner booth, mother, father, 2 young children with pancakes, went quiet mid-sentence. Even Dale, the short-order cook, put his spatula down and looked through the pass-through window. 7 motorcycles pulled into the Red Rock parking lot. The riders were large men in identical cuts, black leather vests with the patch of the Iron Brotherhood across the back. The design was a skull wearing a crown of iron, two crossed wrenches beneath it, the letters IB arching above and Amarillo chapter arching below. The Iron Brotherhood was not, technically, the Hells Angels, but it occupied the same world, shared the same roots, operated under the same codes of loyalty and consequence that made law enforcement refer to such clubs in the careful, non-inflammatory language of people who have decided that escalation is not worth it. Gerald appeared at Sarah's elbow with the speed of a man who had been watching the parking lot. "Call them in," he said. She looked at him. "Call who in?" 911. His collar was already wet. "Tell them we have a situation." Sarah looked through the window. The bikers were dismounting with the practiced ease of men who had been doing this for decades. One was stretching his back, hands on his hips. Another was checking his phone. A third was looking at the diner's pie case through the window with the expression of a man genuinely considering the apple. The largest of them, a man built like a barn door given a leather jacket, silver streaking through his beard all the way to his chest, was simply standing in the morning sun, looking at the diner's sign with an expression that communicated nothing at all, which Sarah read correctly as a man who had learned to give nothing away in public. "They're parking," she said. "That's all they're doing." "Sarah, they're not doing anything, Gerald. They're Hell's Angels. They're not Hell's Angels. And parking in our parking lot isn't a crime." She looked at him steadily. "You want me to call 911 because men with tattoos pulled into a parking lot?" His face did the thing it always did when he was about to make a decision he'd already made. "I'm telling you to call. I'm not calling." The silence between them lasted 2 seconds. It was the kind of silence that contains an entire future inside it. "Your choice," he said, and retreated to his office, which was worse than if he'd argued, because Gerald retreating meant Gerald adding something to a ledger. She took a breath, set down the ketchup bottles, and went to the door. She seated them in the back section, where there was room and where the curious eyes of the other customers would have more distance to cover. She handed out menus without ceremony. She brought water. She answered their questions about the pie. Was it fresh-baked or from a commercial supplier? Was the coffee actual dark roast or the brown approximation that some diners served in order to keep costs low? Was there a breakfast option at 11 in the morning or had they missed it? With the same matter-of-fact efficiency she brought to every table. She did not smile more than usual or less than usual. She did not treat them with the elaborate, strained friendliness that is its own form of condescension, the kind that says I am proving to myself that I am not afraid of you. She was not afraid of them. This was not bravery. It was simply what she saw. 7 men who had ridden through the morning heat and wanted coffee and pie and to sit down. The large man with the silver beard ordered a coffee, black, and a slice of apple pie. He said please. He said thank you. He set his phone face down on the table when she came to take his order, a gesture of such deliberate, unprompted courtesy that it stopped her for just a fraction of a second. She met his eyes briefly. They were a weathered gray, deep set, with the quality of eyes that had decided long ago what they thought about most things and reserved judgment only for the genuinely uncertain. She went back to her other tables. 20 minutes later, Rosa appeared at her shoulder. Rosa Alvarez had worked the Red Rock for 5 years and had a radar for human behavior that Sarah respected deeply. Rosa leaned in close and said, low and urgent, "Come look at what the big one did." Sarah followed her gaze to the counter. The Hendersons, a retired couple who came in every Tuesday without fail, who had been school teachers, who always ordered the breakfast special and tipped in coins with small apologies, were sitting in their usual spots. The new girl, Kayla, was standing in front of them with an expression of pure bewilderment, holding a ticket. "It's been covered," Kayla was saying. "Someone already paid for your breakfast." The old man put down his wallet. "I beg your pardon. Someone paid for it." Kayla pointed, almost involuntarily, toward the back section, and then seemed to catch herself. The old woman put her hand over her mouth. Sarah looked toward table 14. Iron Pete was looking out the window, not at the Hendersons, not at her, just out the window, at the parking lot, at the ordinary August morning, with the expression of a man who had not done anything worth discussing. Rosa looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Rosa. Neither of them said anything. She went outside 10 minutes later to take a bag of trash to the dumpster around the side of the building. Coming back, she nearly walked into a man sitting on the curb, Carl Reeves, a Vietnam veteran she recognized, who sometimes sat at the intersection with a cardboard sign and who had the particular stillness of someone who had been in one kind of war or another for a very long time. He had a cup of coffee, Red Rock cup, fresh. "Where'd the coffee come from?" she said. He looked at it. Big fella came around the side of the building, handed it to me, said it was the dark roast. He paused, didn't want money for it, didn't want anything, just handed it over and went back inside. She stood on the cracked pavement in the August heat and looked at the coffee in Carl's hands and felt something move in her chest. The specific sensation of encountering something true in a landscape where true things had become difficult to find. She went back inside. She walked to the register. She pulled up table 14's bill. 7 covers. Coffee, pie, 2 full breakfast plates, 3 burger baskets, sides, refills. $63.40. She looked at the number for a moment. She thought about the folded money left under a coffee cup for the Hendersons. She thought about Carl on the curb with his fresh coffee. She pressed comp. She wrote on the receipt slip, in her square, deliberate handwriting, on the house. Sarah. She wrote a new ticket for table 14. Amount due, $0. She clipped it and walked it to the back section. Iron Pete looked at the zeroed ticket for a long time. When he looked up at her, there was nothing theatrical in his expression, no surprise, no performed gratitude. He looked at her with the focused attention of a man who was updating a calculation. "You didn't have to do that," he said. His voice was low, with the particular flatness of a man who has no interest in filling silences with noise. "I know," she said. "What's your name?" "Sarah." He looked at her the way you look at something you want to remember accurately. Then he reached out and picked up the paper napkin from the table, thin, white, the Red Rock logo fading in the corner, and he took a pen from his cut and he wrote something on it. He folded it twice, precisely, and held it out to her between 2 fingers. She took it. He stood. When Iron Pete Morrison stood up, it was an event. The way weather is an event, not dramatic but undeniable, changing the atmospheric pressure of the space around it. His crew stood with him in the synchronized ease of people who had spent years moving together. He dropped a 50 on the table, and she started to say something about it, and he gave her one look that said the 50 was not a subject for discussion. He looked at her one final time at the door. "Keep it," he said, and then they were gone. The sound of 7 motorcycles pulling out of the Red Rock parking lot like a sentence finishing itself, and the diner went back to its ordinary sounds of plates and conversation and the slow rotation of the pie case. And Sarah stood by the register with a folded napkin in her hand and didn't yet understand what she was holding. Gerald came out of his office exactly 4 minutes later, which meant he had been watching through the office window. The conversation was brief. She had comped a table without authorization, over his explicit instruction. She was done. He wanted her apron. She untied it. She folded it. She set it on the counter. Rosa said, "Gerald," in a tone that promised consequences, and Gerald pointed at her without looking away from Sarah and said, "Don't." Sarah picked up her bag. She thought about saying everything she knew about Gerald's management of the Red Rock, the cook's skimming, the health inspector's comped meal, the time he'd sent a busboy home without paying him for the last 2 hours because the busboy had made the mistake of needing to leave early. She thought about saying all of it. She said none of it. She walked to the door, stopped, reached into the pocket of the apron on the counter, and took out the folded napkin. She put it in her purse. She walked out into the August morning. She sat at the bus stop and, after a moment, took out the napkin and unfolded it. Peter Morrison had handwriting that looked like it was fighting against itself, large, aggressive, cramped into submission. A phone number. Above it, his full name, Peter Morrison. Below it, pressed hard enough to leave impressions in the table's surface. The words that she would read 100 times over the next 5 years, in different conditions, from different emotional distances, each time finding something new in them. Courage is rare. So is kindness. You have both. This napkin is worth one promise. If you ever need anything, call. She read it twice. She folded it back along its original creases. She put it in the small zippered pocket inside her purse, beside her bus pass and a photograph of Danny at 6 years old, missing 2 front teeth, grinning at a camera that had been in a broken phone that she still hadn't thrown away. She looked at the road. She did not cry at the bus stop. She saved that for the bathroom at home, water running in the tap, so Danny wouldn't hear. The 5 years that followed had a texture that Sarah would later describe to Danny as getting through. Not living, not thriving, but moving forward with the specific grim determination of a person who knows that stopping is not an option because there is someone behind them who needs them to keep walking. She found another waitressing job within 2 weeks at a truck stop off I-40, longer hours and worse tips, a commute that required 2 buses, a manager who wasn't Gerald but was in the same general category of men. She took it without complaint and did it well and looked for something better with the disciplined patience of someone accustomed to the long game. The napkin moved with her, purse to wallet to the corkboard in the apartment kitchen where she pinned Danny's school drawings and her utility bills and the community center schedule. From the corkboard, when they had to move apartments because the landlord raised the rent, to a box under the bed, a shoebox with a cracked lid that she didn't throw away because it contained everything worth keeping. Her mother's rosary, Danny's first-grade report card, a birthday card in her father's handwriting from before he left, and a faded paper napkin from a diner on Route 66. The food truck happened in year 2, the way most things in Sarah's life happened, out of necessity that had been thinking about itself long enough to become ambition. She had spent 27 years eating the food of people who cooked with whatever was available, stretching ingredients the way her mother had stretched money, combining things according to a logic that was entirely intuitive and turned out, when she shared it with other people, to be entirely right. She had a palate tuned by poverty to extract maximum flavor from minimum expense, and she had the kind of curiosity about cooking that is really curiosity about comfort, about what makes food feel like a thing that is being offered rather than merely consumed. She borrowed $3,000 from Rosa, who had quit the Red Rock 2 weeks after Sarah was fired, in a departure she described as Gerald making one too many comments about my hair, and put it toward the deposit on a used food truck that a retired caterer was selling off in Lubbock. She drove it back to Amarillo with Rosa in the passenger seat and a loose exhaust pipe that rattled like a reminder of everything that could go wrong. She called it Mitchell's. The food she made from the window was not complicated. It was the food she had grown up eating, improved by 5 years of paying attention. Brisket tacos with a slaw that had a heat she couldn't entirely explain because it came from a combination of spices she had worked out over 2 years of experimentation. Green chili mac and cheese. A black bean soup with a smokiness that people drove back for specifically. And the thing that became the food truck signature, the thing that people started calling the Mitchell mix, a dry spice rub that she put on everything from sweet potato to pork shoulder. A combination of 12 ingredients and proportions she had worked out by instinct and refined by testing, that achieved the specific and elusive quality of making something taste more completely like itself. The truck started doing well in year 3, not well enough to live on alone. She still worked nights at the truck stop, but well enough that she started keeping records with the serious attention of someone who understood, dimly at first and then clearly, that she might have something real. Danny was 11 by then, taller and quieter than she'd expected, with their mother's eyes and a talent for math that his teacher had mentioned twice in conferences with the tone of an adult who wants you to understand that talented means something specific. She began to think, carefully and mostly in the dark when she couldn't sleep, about what it would mean to build something that could pay for his future. That was when Marcus Chin found her. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon in early spring, the way trouble in nice shoes tends to arrive, during a good moment, when your guard is partly down because things have been going well enough that you've started to believe they might continue to go well. Sarah was running the truck at the downtown lunch spot she'd staked out near the courthouse when a man in a gray suit that cost more than her monthly rent walked up to the window and ordered the brisket taco with extra Mitchell mix heat. He ate it with the deliberate attention of someone who was evaluating rather than enjoying. Then he came back to the window. "That spice combination," he said. "Is it proprietary?" She looked at him. "It's mine, if that's what you're asking." Marcus Chun was 35 years old, with the precise, expensive grooming of someone who had learned that presentation was a form of argument. He had a card that said Apex Ventures beneath his name. He had a way of talking about opportunity that made it sound like a weather system you could step into, something environmental and obvious. And Sarah, who was practical, who was experienced, who was not naive, recognized the pull of it even as she maintained her skepticism. He came back 4 times in 2 weeks. He brought a partner the 4th time, a woman named Davis who asked questions about production volume and supply chains. He used words like scaling and brand equity and first mover advantage with the fluency of someone for whom these words were a native language. He offered her $200,000 for a 40% stake in what he called the Mitchell Mix enterprise, including the food truck operation and any related IP. He offered his legal team to handle the incorporation and IP filing. He offered introductions to 3 regional grocery chains that were, he said, actively looking for exactly this kind of product. She went home and looked at the napkin. She thought about Danny's math teacher saying talented in that specific tone. She said yes. The trap did not spring all at once. That is the particular sophistication of this kind of predation. It assembles itself so gradually that by the time you see it fully formed, you are already inside it. Marcus's legal team handled the incorporation of Mitchell Mix LLC. They handled the IP filing. They drafted the partnership agreement in language so layered and technical that the attorney Sarah hired to review it, the only one she could afford, a young man barely out of law school who mainly handled small property disputes, told her it looked standard with the confidence of someone who did not yet know what he didn't know. For the first 6 months, everything appeared to be working. The Mitchell Mix was in discussions with a grocery distributor in Houston. A magazine in Dallas ran a small feature on Sarah and the food truck. She began to believe, with the fragile and careful belief of someone who has been disappointed before, that this might be the thing that changed the shape of her life. Marcus changed the shape of her life, but not in the way she had believed. In month 8, she received a letter from a law firm she had never heard of informing her that the IP filing for the Mitchell Mix formula was registered not to Mitchell Mix LLC, but to a subsidiary of Apex Ventures, filed 9 days after their agreement was signed, due a technicality in the partnership agreement's IP assignment clause that the young attorney had not flagged because he had never encountered it before. In the same week, she discovered that the Mitchell Mix LLC bank account, which held the initial investment and 6 months of truck revenue, had been restructured under a new operating agreement she had signed without fully understanding. The account was frozen pending a dispute resolution process that would take, according to Marcus's attorney, a minimum of 18 months. She could not access her money. She could not operate under the Mitchell Mix name. She could not prove the formula was hers without the IP filing she had signed away. Her credit was attached to the LLC and went into technical default when the account froze. She was, as far as the law was currently concerned, a woman with a food truck, a debt, and no intellectual property. She was 31 years old. She sat in the apartment kitchen late on a Thursday night, after Danny had gone to sleep, with the documents spread across the table and a pen in her hand, and the specific dull roar in her skull that is not panic, but is the anticipation of panic, controlled by a person who is not yet ready to give up, but does not currently know how to continue. She looked at the papers for a long time. Then she got up and went to the bedroom. She got the shoebox from under the bed. She opened it and took out the napkin. It was 5 years old. It had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had become white seams in the paper. The Red Rock logo at the corner was barely legible, but the handwriting was as clear as the day it was written, pressed hard into the paper by a man who meant what he said. Courage is rare. So is kindness. You have both. This napkin is worth one promise. If you ever need anything, call. She went back to the kitchen table. She picked up her phone. She dialed the number. It rang twice. Morrison. His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Low, flat, no inflection wasted. She had prepared what she was going to say. She had organized the key facts in her head during the 5 minutes between deciding to call and actually calling. She was going to be concise and clear and not emotional, because she had survived 31 years by being concise and clear and managing her emotions in the privacy of bathrooms. What she said was, "This is Sarah, from the Red Rock Diner. 5 years ago, you gave me a napkin." A pause that lasted exactly 3 seconds. "Sarah." His voice did not change, but something in the frequency of it shifted, like a radio finding its station. "I've been wondering when you'd call." She opened her mouth and closed it. "You what?" "I looked for you after I heard they fired you." A pause. "Took me a while to find out your last name. By then you'd moved." Another pause. "I figured when you called, you'd need something real." She held the phone against her ear and looked at the documents on the table. The legal letters, the account freeze notification, the IP assignment clause she hadn't understood, and felt something in her chest that she could not quite name, something that lived on the border between relief and grief, The specific feeling of having been alone with something heavy for a long time and suddenly having someone offer to help carry it. I need something real, she said. Tell me. She told him everything. She was precise and thorough and did not editorialize. She had the documents in front of her and she read the relevant clauses. She described Marcus Chin's methodology from beginning to end, the way you describe a mechanism you are trying to understand by explaining it. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. You still have the napkin? He said. The question was so unexpected that she almost laughed. Yes. Good. Don't throw it away. A pause. Send me everything you have on this man. Every document, every correspondence, every contract. You have my number. Email is the same address, Peterson spelled out. What are you going to do? What I'm going to do, he said, is make sure Marcus Chin never does this to anyone again. A pause. And get your business back. She was quiet. I'll be in Amarillo on Thursday, he said. We'll talk in person. You still making that spice mix? She looked at the documents. She looked at the napkin. Yes, she said. Good. Bring some. The call ended. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she put the napkin in the shoebox, put the shoebox under the bed, and went to sleep for the first time in 3 days. He arrived on Thursday in a truck, a black F-350 that was several years old and had the look of a vehicle that was used for things, not displays, and he was not alone. Tommy Rodriguez, the VP of the Iron Brotherhood chapter, sat in the passenger seat, a compact, dark-eyed man of 38 who had the watchful stillness of someone trained to notice everything worth noticing before deciding whether to mention it. He had a laptop bag over his shoulder, which was the first thing that surprised Sarah, who had been uncertain what to expect. The second person was in the back seat. She stepped out and Sarah took a moment to register her. A woman in her mid-40s, with close-cropped hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of posture that suggests someone has been managing large and complicated things for long enough that it has become effortless. She was dressed simply, dark slacks, a linen shirt, and she extended her hand with the directness of someone who does not use politeness as cover. Linda Morrison, she said, Pete's wife. I run the financial side of Iron Holdings. I've already read everything you sent. Pete climbed out last. He was exactly as she remembered. The silver beard, the height, the quality of taking up space without performing it. He looked at her for a moment with the same evaluating steadiness from 5 years ago. You look like you haven't slept, he said. I have an 8-year-old brother and a frozen bank account, she said. Sleep is theoretical. Something moved in his expression, not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one. Fair enough. They sat at Sarah's kitchen table, the same table where she had spread the documents 3 nights ago, and Linda Morrison opened a folder with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and described, without drama or detour, what she had found in the documents Sarah had sent. The IP assignment clause was, as the young attorney had failed to recognize, a well-known predatory mechanism. Marcus Chun had used versions of the same clause in 6 previous investment agreements over 4 years. 2 of those businesses had been destroyed. 2 had settled quietly, signing NDAs that prevented them from speaking publicly. The 5th had tried to fight and run out of money. The 6th, a food entrepreneur in San Antonio named Denise Wheeler, had never been located. Tommy had located her. She was working at a grocery store in Corpus Christi and had been looking for someone to return her calls. 6 victims, Linda said. That we know of. She looked at Sarah. The IP clause is aggressive, but it does have a challenge mechanism. If you can prove your formula predates the filing through documented evidence of use or sale prior to the assignment, you have grounds for an invalidation claim. She paused. Do you have early records? Sales logs, social media posts with the recipe, any dated evidence of the formula before you signed his contract? Sarah looked at her. I have 2 years of food truck sales records and 300 posts on an Instagram account from before I met him. Linda looked at Pete. Pete looked at the ceiling briefly, in the way of a man who has just avoided saying something unnecessary. That's your foundation, Linda said. She wrote something down. We're going to need an IP attorney and an SEC attorney. Pete has both. I can't afford, Sarah started. You're not paying for them, Pete said. He said it in the same tone he'd used when she tried to discuss the $50 tip. The tone that indicated this was not a subject for further discussion. What followed over the next 6 weeks had the quality of watching a structure disassemble, not violently, but with the steady, engineered precision of demolition that knows exactly which supports to remove first. Pete's IP attorney, a woman named Carol Kwan who had spent 20 years in technology patent litigation and had the low-key lethality of someone who had won arguments in rooms most people never entered, filed the invalidation claim on the Mitchell Mix IP assignment within 10 days of their first meeting, backed by 2 years of documented evidence of prior use that Marcus Chin's legal team had apparently not known to look for, or had looked for and not found, which amounted to the same failure. Tommy Rodriguez, working from the same laptop he'd carried into Sarah's kitchen, assembled a communication thread between Marcus Chun and the attorney who had drafted the IP clause. Communications obtained through the discovery process in a related civil suit he'd quietly joined as an interested party that contained, in one extraordinary email, the phrase "she won't know what hit her until the filing clears." Judge William Carver did not practice law anymore. He was 60 years old, retired from the federal bench, and spent most of his time fly fishing in the Guadalupe River. He and Pete Morrison had met in Vietnam in 1983, or rather, in the aftermath of Vietnam, in a VA waiting room in San Antonio where neither of them was supposed to be talking to anyone, but both of them were the kind of man who talked anyway. They had been friends for 30 years. Pete called him on a Tuesday, explained the situation in 7 minutes, and Judge Carver said, "Send me the file," in a tone that suggested he had been waiting for something worth doing. Judge Carver was still on speaking terms with every federal judge in the Western District of Texas. The email from Marcus Chin's attorney traveled up 3 levels of professional notification in 11 days. Marcus Chin's attorney called Linda Morrison on a Wednesday to discuss settlement. "There is no settlement," Linda said pleasantly. "There is restoration. Your client will return the IP assignment in full, restore the LLC bank account with 12% annual interest for the period of freezing, pay the legal costs of all 6 affected parties, and withdraw from any food and beverage investment activity in the state of Texas for a period of 5 years. A pause. If these terms are met within 30 days, your client will not be named in the SEC referral that Judge Carver has already submitted." There was a long silence on the phone. "And if the terms aren't met?" the attorney said, in the tone of someone asking a question they don't want answered. "Then they are met later," Linda said, "under worse conditions." Sarah got her IP back in 22 days. She stood in Carol Kwan's office and looked at the invalidation confirmation and the restored LLC documents and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not relief, exactly, which implies the restoration of a prior state, but something more structural, the feeling of standing on solid ground and knowing it to be solid, which is different from simply not having fallen through yet. She called Rosa. Rosa said a number of things in quick succession, several of which were in Spanish and all of which conveyed the correct emotional register. Sarah called Danny's school and left a message for his math teacher saying that yes, she was aware Danny was talented, and yes, she was looking into options, and yes, she thought the future was going to be different than it had recently appeared. She kept the napkin. They met again 3 weeks after the documents were restored, at a diner in Amarillo that was neither the Red Rock nor her own truck. Neutral ground, Linda's suggestion, because the conversation they were about to have was one that required everyone at the table to be choosing freely. Pete sat across from her. Linda was beside him. Tommy was at a separate table, drinking coffee and reading something on his phone, present in the way that Pete's people were always present, available but not intrusive. Pete put a folder on the table. "Iron Holdings invests in food businesses," he said. "We have 3 restaurant groups, a distribution network, and a regional grocery partnership in 4 states. He pushed the folder toward her. "We want to invest in the Mitchell Mix. Not to own it, to partner with it. You retain full majority ownership. We provide capital, distribution access, and infrastructure." She looked at the folder. She looked at him. "Why?" she said. Not defensively. She genuinely wanted to understand the calculation. He looked at her steadily. "Because I've been investing in food businesses for 8 years, and I can tell you exactly what the Mitchell Mix is worth at scale. And because," he paused, briefly, which was as close to hesitation as he came. 5 years ago, a woman who needed her job bought a stranger a cup of coffee and a piece of pie because it was the right thing to do. I've been in rooms full of people my whole life, and I have never once been able to explain why some people see past the thing that other people see first. You saw past it. That's worth something. The table was quiet. "How much?" she said finally. Linda opened the folder to the second page. Sarah looked at the investment figure. She looked at the projected revenue at 5 years. She looked at the expansion plan for what was labeled Sarah's Table, a Mitchell Mix concept, a diner chain built around the food that had started on a truck outside the Amarillo courthouse, expanded to 12 locations in Texas and New Mexico, with a retail product line that would put the Mitchell Mix on grocery store shelves in 4 states. She looked at the proposed partnership contract. She looked at Pete. "There's one condition," she said. He waited. "The napkin goes in every location. Framed. On the wall." She met his eyes. "People need to know what this started with." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. She picked up the pen. The first Sarah's Table opened on a Thursday morning in October, on the same stretch of Route 66 where the Red Rock Diner still operated, 3 blocks west. It was not a grand building. It was a converted filling station with high ceilings and good light, with chrome fixtures that referenced without imitating the Route 66 aesthetic, with large windows and tables that were heavy enough to feel permanent, and with a kitchen visible from the dining room through a wide pass-through window so that everyone eating could see where their food was coming from. Rosa Alvarez was the front-of-house manager. She had accepted this position by saying, "Of course I'm doing this. What else would I be doing?" And then crying briefly in the bathroom, and then returning to the table and asking for her contract. Danny Mitchell was 13 and stood near the door for most of the morning with the expression of someone who was trying very hard not to look proud and failing entirely. He had grown 6 inches in the past 2 years and had the kind of focused quiet that Sarah recognized as their mother's most reliable gift, passed down to him across the fact of her death. The Hendersons arrived at 10:15, not knowing the full story of why they had been invited, having simply received a handwritten card that said your presence would mean a great deal. They were seated at table 2, by the window, and given the full breakfast, which they accepted with the bewildered and touching dignity of people unaccustomed to being the subject of specific attention. Carl Reeves arrived at 10:30. He was clean-shaven and wearing a collared shirt, and he sat at the counter with a cup of coffee, the dark roast, and did not ask how much it cost, because someone had already arranged for it to not cost anything. He didn't know that Pete had spent 3 months quietly working through a veterans housing nonprofit he'd funded since 2018 to ensure Carl would have stable housing by the end of the year. He just knew that the coffee was good and the stool was comfortable and the woman behind the counter, Rosa, who had made it her personal mission to make Carl feel like a regular from day one, had already learned how he took his eggs. Tommy stood near the back with a coffee, watching the room with the same watchful stillness he always carried, and occasionally catching Pete's eye and exchanging the wordless communication of 2 people who have been in enough situations together that they no longer need full sentences. Linda was in the kitchen. She had told Sarah she was there to observe the operations, which was true, and she was also there because she genuinely liked watching a kitchen run well, which was also true, and because she had grown, over the past 3 months of building this together, genuinely fond of the woman who had called her husband at midnight with a shoebox of documents and a voice like flint. Pete sat at the counter, next to Carl, with his coffee and a slice of the apple pie that Sarah had put on the menu on opening day with a deliberateness that Carl didn't know about and the Hendersons didn't know about, but that Rosa knew about and understood precisely. Sarah came out of the kitchen at 11. She was wearing a white chef's apron and her hair was back, and she had flour on her forearm that she hadn't noticed. She looked at the full dining room, the Hendersons by the window, Carl at the counter, Rosa moving through the room with the efficiency of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be, Danny at the door, Pete with his coffee looking at the wall. She followed his gaze. The frame was oak, simple and solid. Behind the glass, mounted on a white backing, was a paper napkin, 5 years old, folded and unfolded so many times that its seams were white. The Red Rock Diner logo barely visible at the corner. A phone number, a name, and the words, in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper the way it had pressed hard into the table of a diner on Route 66 on a Tuesday in August 5 years ago. Courage is rare. So is kindness. You have both. This napkin is worth one promise. If you ever need anything, call. Pete looked at her. You kept it, he said. You told me to, she said. You picked up his coffee. Good pie, he said. The partnership contract was for $3.2 million over the initial investment period, with projected 5-year returns that Carol Kwan, who had seen numbers her entire career, described as conservative in a way that suggests whoever made these projections is trying not to get excited. Sarah Mitchell signed it at a table in a law office in Amarillo on a Wednesday morning, with Danny beside her and Rosa taking a photograph on her phone that she would post later with a caption that required 3 attempts and ultimately just said, "She did it." There would be 12 Sarah's Table locations by the end of the following year. The Mitchell mix would be on grocery shelves in Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Colorado within 18 months, in a red tin with a simple design, a food truck under a Texas sky, and beneath it, in the font Sarah had chosen because it looked like handwriting, "Made with what you have, shared with who's in front of you." Marcus Chin accepted the settlement terms in full. The SEC referral resulted in a 2-year prohibition on investment activity that his attorney described as a manageable outcome, which was what attorneys said when the outcome was not manageable but was also not worse. Denise Wheeler, the woman in Corpus Christi, used her restored IP and settlement funds to open a bakery. She sent Sarah a card. Gerald Hawkins read about the opening of Sarah's Table in the Amarillo paper on a Friday morning while drinking his coffee at the Red Rock. The article had a photograph of the framed napkin on the wall and a quote from Sarah about the day she got fired, which she described as the day someone did me a favor without knowing it. The article did not mention the Red Rock by name. Gerald looked at the photograph for a while and then turned to the sports section. The Iron Brotherhood still met on Tuesdays. They still rode out of Amarillo in formation, 7 bikes minimum, the morning sun catching the chrome in a way that made people look. They were still regarded by local law enforcement with that careful, specific form of respect. Iron Pete still ordered coffee, black, and apple pie when the occasion called for it. He still set his phone face down on the table when he spoke to someone. He was 50 years old now. He had a silver beard and gray eyes and hands that had worked hard for 3 decades. And on his phone he had, in the photographs folder, one image he never deleted, a close-up of a paper napkin in a frame, with handwriting that pressed hard into the paper. He had taken the photograph himself, at the opening, when he thought nobody was watching. He had been the last to leave that Thursday. He had stood at the door for a moment, looking back at the room, at Rosa clearing plates, at Danny talking to Carl at the counter, at the frame on the wall with the light catching the glass. At the napkin, he had told a woman, 5 years ago, to keep it. She had kept it. And everything that came after, the partnership, the chain, the grocery shelves, the $1 million, and the $3 million, and all the dollars that would follow, had been there in the napkin all along. Not in the promise, not in the phone number, in the moment before, in a woman who saw a man that other people were afraid of and chose to see something true instead. Courage is rare. So is kindness. She had both.